Alright, yesterday you guys did an exploration to kind of help see what happens with graphs when the highest power of x is 2. And all of the graphs that you should have gotten should have looked like U's. Some of the U's were going up, and some of the U's were going down. They were going up when your x squared was positive, they were going down when your x squared was negative. But all of those were called parabolas. And that's what we're going to talk more about today. What do we know about parabolas, and what do we need to get, what information do we need to get from the equations? So the first thing is that all parabolas are symmetric, and symmetric means you can cut something in half and get the same thing on both sides. So if you would look at all the ones that you did yesterday, there's this line, invisible line, that's going to cut through the middle that can cut your parabola in half, and that makes it symmetrical. That line is always going to go through the point at the bottom, or if your parabola is opening down, it's going to go through the point at the top. And that point at the very top or the very bottom in the middle is called the vertex. So this line cuts your parabola in half, and that line always goes through the vertex. And so everything that we're going to do today is based on the axis of symmetry, the line that cuts it in half, and the vertex, the point at the very bottom or the point at the very top. To find the axis of symmetry, or the line that cuts it in half, you use this formula, negative b over 2a. Negative b over 2a, the place that we get a and b is in front of your variables in your equation. So if you have something that says 2x squared plus 5x minus 6, there are 3 numbers in that equation, and those numbers correspond with the variables a, b, and c. A is always the number in front of the x squared. So in this case, in this example that I made up, my a is 2 because it's the number in front of the x squared. B is always the number in front of the x, so in this case that is a positive 5. And c is always the number by itself, the constant, which in this case is a negative 6. The formula that I'm giving you, negative b over 2a, only needs a and b, but I want to also find c because we're going to need it in the future. So if we just get used to identifying all 3, a, b, and c, then it's going to help us in the future. So we're going to identify a, b, and c. Remember, a goes with the x squared, b goes with the x, and c is alone. Okay. And then you use negative b over 2a to find the axis of symmetry. And then that also gives you the x value to plug in to find your vertex, the point at the top or the bottom. So let's look at this equation. Right here, I know a is always with my x squared, so a is negative 3. I know b is always with the x, so that is negative 6. And I know c is always by itself, so in that case this is a positive 4. So that's the first step. Identify a, b, and c from the number with the x squared, the x, and then the number by itself. The axis of symmetry uses this formula, x equals negative b over 2a. So just like yesterday when I was plugging things in, I'm going to use parentheses anytime I plug something in. So this negative is part of the equation, so I put that first. And then I see a b, so I put parentheses because now I have to make a substitution. The b I'm plugging in is right here, negative 6. So that whole thing goes in the parentheses. Over 2 times my a, which is negative 3. So I just used the formula, and I plugged in b and a because that's what it asked for. Now I simplify that equation. So a negative 6 is a positive 6. On the bottom I have 2 times negative 3, which is negative 6. And then divide it out. 6 divided by negative 6 is negative 1. That is my axis of symmetry. Your axis of symmetry is that vertical line that cuts your parabola in half. And so you write the equation as x equals -1. That's the axis of symmetry. Okay? You also use that same x to plug it into your equation like you did yesterday to find your vertex. So from here on out it is exactly what you did yesterday, but you used the x you just found. So I start to rewrite the equation that was given to me, -3. I see an x, so I put a parenthesis, and I plug in -1 because that was what I got from my answer up above. Squared, because that's part of the equation, -6 parentheses -1 plus 4. This is exactly what you did before, except now you found what to plug in for x instead of me just giving it to you. So then you put it in your calculator exactly how it looks, with you having put your parentheses in the correct places, and it tells you that when you put that in your calculator you get 7. So you plugged -1 in for x, and you got 7 for y. That is your vertex. Okay, and if you think about the parabolas that you drew yesterday, the vertex is either at the very top or the vertex is at the very bottom. Okay? So we have to find the axis of symmetry using the formula. Then you plug that x in and find the vertex. First thing we have to do, remember we have to find a, b, and c. A is always with the x squared, so if there's not a number in front of it, it's a 1. B is always the number with the x, so in this case that's 2. C is always the number by itself. We don't have a number by itself, so that's 0. To find the axis of symmetry, you use the formula -b over 2a. So negative is part of the formula, parentheses, b is 2 over 2, parentheses, a is 1. That's -2 over 2 times 1, which is 2. Divide it out and get -1. So x equals -1. That's my axis of symmetry. That's the first answer I need. AOS is axis of symmetry. But you also use that same number to plug into your equation to find y. So I start to write my equation. I see an x, and I'm plugging in -1 because that's what I got from my axis of symmetry. So anywhere I see an x, I plug in -1. As long as you put your parentheses in the correct places, you can put it in your calculator exactly how it reads, and it'll tell you what your answer is. So in this case, we plugged in -1 for x, and we got -1 for y. That point is your vertex. So the first thing you find is the axis of symmetry. That's just the x. And then the second thing you find is the vertex. That is a point. The x that you found before and the y that you found from plugging it in. The last thing we have to know is if that vertex is at the top of my graph or if that vertex is at the bottom of the graph. So think back to yesterday's examples. Some of your parabolas went up and some of your parabolas went down. They went up when the number in front of the x squared was positive. They went down when the number in front of the x squared was negative. So in this case, the number in front of the x squared, or my a, is positive, so my graph is going up. Make sure you draw yourself a little line. So draw yourself a picture because you know that A is positive, so it's going to go up. And then you say, where is the vertex? The vertex is the very bottom point, and we call that a minimum. So you just say that the vertex is a minimum. And those are the three things you need: the axis of symmetry, the vertex, and then whether it's a minimum or a maximum. So let's do this one start to finish. The very first thing you do is identify A, B, and C. A is always the number in front of the x squared, in this case is a 1. B is always the number in front of the x, in this case it's 4. C is always the number by itself, in this case -9. The axis of symmetry, or AOS, you find by using negative b over 2a. So negative parentheses, my b is 4, over 2 parentheses, my a is 1. Simplify it. -4 over 2 times 1 is 2. -4 divided by 2 is -2. Axis of symmetry is always x equals, so x equals -2. That's the first answer we need, AOS, axis of symmetry. The second thing we need is our vertex, and we do that by plugging this in for x into our formula, or into our equation. So parentheses, -2, just like we did yesterday, squared, plus 4 parentheses, -2, minus 9. As long as you put parentheses, you can plug it in your calculator. And then see what they give you, which in this case is -13. That's your y. The x is what you plugged in. So we plugged in -2 for x, and we got -13 for y. That's our second answer. That's our vertex. The last thing we need is we need to know if that vertex is at the top of my graph or if it's at the bottom of my graph. Again, if you look at A is positive, which means my graph opens up. That's what we learned yesterday, which puts that vertex at the very bottom. Again, bottom is minimum. So that's your third answer. And this is what you have to do for your assignment. Find these three things: axis of symmetry, vertex, and then maximum or minimum. Last one. All again. A, in this case, is -1. B is 5, and C is 6, just from the numbers in my equation. Axis of symmetry, AOS, I find using the formula -b over 2a. Plug them in. Negative parentheses, B is 5. 2 parentheses, A is -1. Simplify it. -5 over -2 is a positive 5 over 2, or positive 2.5. So x equals 2.5. That's my axis of symmetry. You plug that number in. Even though it's not pretty, that's okay. You plug it into the equation you were given. Negative was part of the equation, so it's outside the parentheses. I got 2.5 for my x, so I plug that in anywhere I see an x. Put it in your calculator exactly how it reads. Since the negative was part of the equation, it goes outside the parentheses. Plug it in, and I got 12.25. That's my y. So we plugged 2.5 in for x, and we got 12.25 for y. That point is my vertex. And then the last thing we need is maximum or minimum. A is negative, which means my U shape opens down, which puts the vertex at the top. That's a maximum. Those are the three things you need for your assignment: axis of symmetry, vertex, maximum or minimum. So axis of symmetry will always be x equals -b over 2a. Vertex is always a point. And then maximum or minimum, it's a maximum if it opens down. So if a is negative, it's a minimum if it opens up when a is positive. 3 questions.